A millionaire rushed home to see his wife and daughter after months away due to work obligations. But when he arrived, his daughter unexpectedly uttered a single sentence that left him reeling. David Ross turned off the engine. The gleaming Cadillac sat parked on a street littered with dry leaves in an affluent Detroit neighborhood. He adjusted his suit collar, checking his reflection one last time. 3 years had passed since the divorce. That was the time David had missed Lily's dinners and parent-teacher meetings. At 38, David owned an 8-figure fortune in Silicon Valley. He had always believed that the numbers in his bank account were the best shield for his wife and daughter. David opened the car door, stepping out with a silk-wrapped gift box in his hand. Inside was a limited edition doll he had to order 6 months in advance. He took a deep breath, rehearsing what he would say to Elena. Every month, David routinely transferred $50,000 into the family trust. Marcus, his lawyer and closest friend, always reported that everything was fine. Elena and his daughter were surely living like queens in this mansion. But as David approached the gate, his feet froze. A rusted iron chain was tightly wrapped around the 2 main doors. Weeds grew past his knees, obscuring the garage entrance. The house he had once bought for $2 million now looked like a gray, desiccated relic. David looked up at the front door. A bank foreclosure notice was taped diagonally across the peeling wood. The date on the paper showed the house had been seized 6 months ago due to overdue payments. The millionaire's confidence crumbled instantly. David pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus's number. He paced back and forth in front of the iron gate, his fingers clutching the cold metal bar. "Listen, Marcus, I'm standing in front of the house. What on earth is going on? Why did the bank seal my house?" Only a long dialing tone answered him. David called a second time, then a third. The voicemail repeated steadily. Marcus's silence felt like a grave warning. David felt a chill run down his spine. The flawless financial report sent to his email every month suddenly became meaningless. An elderly woman walking a small dog passed by on the other side of the street. She paused, looking at the Cadillac, then at David with an expression full of judgment. David recognized Mrs. Miller, his former neighbor. He quickly crossed the street. "Mrs. Miller, do you know where Elena and Lily went? Why is the house in this condition?" Mrs. Miller didn't answer immediately. She looked David's expensive suit up and down, and then sneered. "Oh, the millionaire finally remembers the way home, does he? Did you come back to see them starve?" "I don't understand what you're saying. I've been sending money back regularly to Marcus." Marcus? That slick lawyer who used to drive his fancy car here. He only came to take Elena's last pieces of furniture before the bank swooped in. Elena had to sell her wedding ring just to buy milk for the little one. Do you know how many nights Lily cried herself to sleep because she was hungry?" David felt his chest tighten. Every word from Mrs. Miller was like a dagger thrust into his arrogance. He was a technology genius, yet he let someone deceive him right under his nose. Mrs. Miller took a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket and tossed it onto the ground at David's feet. "Go find them there, but I suggest you take off that suit. They'll strip you clean before you even find their apartment in the East Side." David picked up the paper. The address read, "Apartment Complex Number 4, East Side." That was a neighborhood of dilapidated buildings and the highest crime rate in the city. David looked at the gift box in his hand, then back at the desolate mansion. He had no more time to be stunned. He ran to his car, carelessly throwing the expensive gift box into the back seat. David revved the engine. The sound roared through the quiet space of the wealthy neighborhood. The Cadillac sped away, leaving behind the rusted iron gate and the neighbors' condemnations. He floored the accelerator, heading straight toward the East Side slums. Only one question remained in David's mind. What had Marcus done to his family? The luxury car looked completely out of place among the gray blocks of the East Side. David stopped in front of an apartment building with broken windows. He got out of the car, clutching the address slip in his sweaty palm. David locked the Cadillac. He walked on a sidewalk covered with broken glass and empty cans. The smell of garbage and sewage was overwhelming. Homeless individuals sitting by the roadside looked at his expensive suit as if he were a strange object dropped from another planet. David gripped the address slip, stepping into apartment complex number 4. The concrete staircase was chipped, reeking of dampness and cigarette smoke. He reached the third floor. The faint yellow light in the hallway flickered nonstop. A few yards away, a woman was kneeling on the floor. She wore a faded t-shirt and rough-stained canvas pants. Her thin hands held an old rag, diligently scrubbing the floor covered in dark stains. David stopped dead in his tracks. It was Elena. The woman who had been the campus beauty queen, the one who had attended glamorous galas with him, was now scrubbing floors for money. Elena looked up. When her eyes met David's, the rag fell from her hand. She didn't stand up to greet him, nor did she cry. Elena sprang up on instinct, rushing to the door of apartment 304. She blocked the entrance, arms spread wide, her back pressed firmly against the rotting wood. "What are you doing here, David? I came to find you and our daughter. Why are you in this place? Find us after 3 years. Look around. This is a place for the forsaken. You don't belong here in that fancy suit. I never abandoned you. I still sent money to Marcus regularly. $50,000 every month, Elena. I thought you and Lily were living the best life possible. $50,000. Who are you telling fairy tales to? Look at these hands, David. Look closely." Elena held out her hands in front of him. Her fingers were rough, chapped with short-clipped nails stained with cleaning chemicals. The calluses were deeply ingrained in her skin, living proof of her hardships. David tried to reach out and take them, but Elena quickly pulled them back. She moved closer to the door, her eyes filled with caution. "Don't touch me. You had your life in Silicon Valley. We were evicted from the house 6 months ago for not having money to pay the bank. I called your office hundreds of times, but Marcus said you didn't want to be disturbed." He lied. "I never received any calls from you." "It doesn't matter now. Why are you here to fight for custody or to show off your wealth in front of me and our child? I just want to take care of you both. I didn't know what happened." "You didn't know because you were busy making money. You were so busy building your empire that you forgot what your own daughter looks like. Go away. Don't let the people here see you. They don't take kindly to people like you." David took a step forward, trying to close the distance. Elena tensed up even more, her breathing becoming ragged. She looked at the expensive watch on David's wrist, then down at the trash in the corner of the hallway. The contrast was a chasm separating them. "I'm not going anywhere until I see Lily. She doesn't want to see you. She doesn't know who her father is besides a name on debt notices. I have a gift for her. I've been waiting for this day for a long time. Your gifts can't buy back the nights she had a high fever and I didn't have money for medicine. Take that phony kindness back to California." Elena used all her strength to push David hard on the chest. He stumbled back a step, helplessness evident on his face. He wanted to scream that he loved them, that he had worked crazily hard only for them. But looking at the reality before him, all words seemed grotesque. Elena stood there, her eyes red, but not letting a single tear fall. She guarded the door, as if protecting the last shred of her dignity. "David, please, just leave us alone. Our life is bad enough as it is. I won't let you suffer anymore. I'm taking you out of here right now. Out of here and then what? Only for you to disappear again when you have a new project. We are not numbers on your spreadsheet." The conflict between them reached its peak. David intended to forcefully push the door open to find his daughter. He couldn't stand to see Elena in this state any longer. He needed to do something immediately to fix a mistake whose cause he still didn't fully understand. Just as David's hand touched the doorknob, a faint creaking sound came from inside. The wooden door behind Elena slowly opened. Elena turned back in alarm but was too late to stop it. A small girl stepped out. She was wearing an oversized t-shirt and brand new jeans. David stopped short. It was Lily. His daughter had grown so much since the old photos, but the smile David had longed for didn't appear. Lily didn't run to him. She walked with difficulty. With every step, Lily had to drag her left foot slightly. Her face was scrunched up, her lips tightly pursed, as if enduring a dull ache. Lily looked at David with a strange look, then she bent down, holding her hip. David felt his breath catch. He stared at his daughter's hobbled walk. The anger toward Elena vanished, replaced by an extreme fear. Something was wrong with the child, and it wasn't just simple poverty. Lily walked to Elena's side, clinging to the hem of her mother's shirt. She looked at David, then looked up and spoke quietly to her mother, her eyes still fixed on the strange man in front of them. "Mommy, I'm hurting so much." David felt the world around him stop. All arguments about money, about Marcus, about his 3-year absence dissolved. All he saw was Lily's painful gait. David knelt down on the damp-stained floor to get a closer look at his daughter. "Lily, it's Daddy. What happened to your leg?" Lily didn't answer. She backed behind her mother's legs, hiding the oddly protruding part of her hip beneath the stiff fabric of her pants. Elena bent down and hugged her daughter. Her eyes, when she looked at David now, were no longer angry, but filled with deep despair. David stared intently at Lily's small face. He ignored Elena's attempt to stop him moving closer and sinking to his knees on the dirt-covered floor. At this distance, David saw more clearly than ever the cost of his 3 years of absence. Lily was only 6, but her eyes no longer held a mischievous spark. They contained a quiet resignation, the kind of emotion a child raised in luxury should never have. Lily timidly looked at the strange man trembling before her. She glanced at her mother as if asking for permission, then slowly stepped forward. David opened his arms wide. Lily leaned her head on his shoulder. When he held his daughter in his arms, David was shocked to realize her body was as fragile as a dried branch. Through the faded t-shirt, he distinctly felt every protruding rib under his hand. She was too thin. The anger David felt toward Elena vanished instantly, replaced by a suffocating heartache. Lily leaned close to David's ear. She whispered, her breath carrying the faint smell of milk. "Daddy, there's something on my behind that hurts me a lot." David froze. He gently pushed her back to look into her eyes. Lily winced, her hand instinctively going to her back hip. David carefully turned his daughter around. He pulled down the stiff waistband of her jeans slightly. A gray, broad, and rough plastic object was revealed. It was a supermarket security tag. It was still intact, pressed tightly against Lily's pale skin. Around the area where the plastic tag was embedded was a large bruise, turning purplish red. David was stunned. He realized that something was the very object tormenting his daughter with every step. He turned to Elena, who stood frozen beside him. "Elena, what is this? Why is this still on her?" Elena couldn't stand steady. She clung to the doorframe, her eyes filled with shame. She didn't look at David, but down at her tightly clasped hands. Lily didn't have any suitable pants to wear to school anymore. The old ones were all too short and torn. "I went to the discount supermarket down the street. I stood there for hours and realized I didn't have $10 in my purse. I hid them in my bag." "You stole them." "I had no other choice, David. I brought them home but couldn't get the tag off. I didn't have money for bolt cutters. I didn't dare use a hammer for fear the ink pack inside would break and ruin the only pair of pants the little one had. I told Lily to try and endure it, wait until I had enough money from my cleaning job to buy cutters." Elena couldn't finish her sentence. She buried her head in her hands, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. She didn't scream or wail, only muffled sobs echoed in the silent hallway. Elena's confession was like a bucket of cold water dumped over David's self-satisfaction. His ex-wife was forced to shoplift a $10 pair of jeans and leave their daughter with a bruise from a security tag. David looked at the injury on Lily's skin, then at the dark apartment behind them. He felt like an accomplice in this misery. David stood up abruptly. He no longer had the confused or helpless demeanor of a few minutes earlier. He gently lifted Lily into his arms. She felt light, her head resting on his chest, as if finding a haven after a long storm. David turned to Elena, his voice sharp, containing an unwavering determination. "Pack your belongings, right now, just the essentials." "Where are you taking us?" "We are leaving this place. I won't let you two stay in this wretched hole for another minute. Don't ask any questions, just follow me. Please. Trust me one more time." Elena looked at David. She saw the eyes of the man she once loved, the one who always had a solution for every problem. She didn't argue anymore. She slipped into the narrow room, quickly gathering a few items into an old bag. David stood at the door, holding Lily tightly. He knew that when they walked out of this building, the real battle would begin. When they reached the car, David placed Lily in the back seat. He saw the old teddy bear Lily was clutching. It was Mr. Bear, the one he had given her 3 years ago. Lily looked at him, her small hand still gripping the lapel of his suit jacket as if afraid he would disappear into the darkness again. David locked the car door, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. A sleek black car was parked in the distance, headlights off, but the engine running steadily. "Buckle up, Elena. We have work to do tonight." David stepped on the gas. The car sped off, leaving apartment complex number 4 behind. In his mind, the image of the plastic tag and Lily's bruise clearly lingered, urging him toward a financial reckoning that awaited. The car's direction was not a hotel, but Marcus's private office. David needed answers before the sun rose. The stark truth was revealed. How would David confront the traitor to protect his daughter? Follow the next developments to witness the financial reckoning begin. The Cadillac sped through the quiet night of the east side. The silence in the car was thick, broken only by the steady breathing of Lily, who had succumbed to exhaustion in her mother's arms. David drove as if he were escaping a ghost, but in reality, he was heading straight for the city center, where glittering neon lights promised a false sense of security. He parked in front of the Ritz-Carlton hotel lobby. David got out, handed the keys to the valet, and gently took Lily from Elena's arms. He walked straight into the lobby, ignoring the curious glances toward Elena, the thin woman in old clothes walking beside a dapper gentleman. David checked into the presidential suite with a powerful black credit card. As soon as the room door closed, he picked up the internal phone. "I need a private physician up to room 2205 right now. Paid double the service fee." 15 minutes later, the doctor arrived. David stood leaning against the wall, arms crossed, watching the doctor carefully use a specialized solution to loosen the glue and ink around the plastic tag. When the tag fell off, a purplish-red bruise was clearly visible on Lily's hip. The little girl softly whimpered in her sleep. David felt an electric current run down his spine. A CEO's resolve helped him maintain a calm appearance, but inside him was a storm. He looked at Elena. She stood in the corner of the room, her eyes blankly staring into space. The luxury of the room with its silk curtains and cashmere rug seemed only to highlight the misery she had endured. The doctor left after dropping off a tube of ointment. Lily was sleeping deeply thanks to a mild pain reliever. David tucked his daughter in, then turned to Elena. "Elena, we need to talk." "Talk? What do you plan to say, David?" "I just want to know why things got this bad." Elena gave a bitter laugh. She walked over to her old handbag, rummaged through it, and pulled out a stack of crumpled, stained papers. She threw them forcefully onto the glass coffee table in the middle of the room. The papers scattered before settling under the warm, luxurious light. "Here's your money. Read them and see how generous you've been. Hurry." David picked up a paper. It was a notice titled, "Family Support Fund Update." His eyes stopped at the bold print. "Due to volatile business conditions and personal debt from the beneficiary, we are obliged to reduce the grant to a minimum level to ensure the fund's sustainability." At the bottom was a signature in blue ink, a familiar flowing handwriting, David Ross. "This is not my handwriting." "It's your electronic signature, David. Marcus sent it to me every quarter. He said you were too busy to write a letter yourself, but you were alert enough to know that my daughter and I were overspending." David flipped through the other papers. The content grew worse and worse. There were letters directly rejecting the request to loan money for Lily's heart surgery 2 years ago, citing financial infeasibility. David immediately recognized the writing style. It was full of tedious legal terms like beneficiary, legal obligation, and exclusion clause. Marcus always talked like that. He liked to use complexity to hide emptiness. "I have never seen these papers. I never refused the money for Lily's surgery either. Marcus told me the surgery was successful and that I had paid for everything in full. He tricked you and you let him do it because you were too lazy to check for yourself." Elena didn't stop there. She opened a chipped leather notebook and placed it next to the stack of letters. This was her expense journal. David leaned in to look. The tiny, shaky handwriting read, "Day 12, 2 eggs, $1. Day 14, bus ticket to the hospital, $2.50. Income from Ross Fund, $500. $500. I only received $500 a month into an account named Elena Services. Marcus said it was a humanitarian grant from your personal fund because your company was on the verge of bankruptcy. He said if I breathed a word to the press, you would lose everything and I wouldn't have a penny to raise my daughter. David felt his throat go dry. He pulled out his phone, opened his banking app, and logged into his admin account. He turned the screen toward Elena. The transaction history was clearly displayed 5th of every month internal transfer. Ross Trust Fund, minus $50,000. Look, Elena, the money is still leaving my account. I'm not bankrupt. My company has never been stronger. Elena looked at the phone screen. Her eyes widened, the screen's light reflecting her shock. She looked at her notebook, then back at the phone. The truth emerged like a torn piece of fabric. $50,000 flowed from one side, but only $500 reached the other. The chasm in between was Marcus. So, all this time, he has been stealing from my daughter. He let Lily wear that security tag just so he could buy another luxury car or another mansion. David's anger was no longer a raging fire. It had turned into a block of cold ice. He looked at Elena, seeing the hatred in her eyes gradually replaced by painful emptiness. She realized she had resented the wrong person, and David realized that he had trusted the wrong enemy. His naivete had indirectly driven his wife and daughter into destitution. I'm sorry, Elena. I was so foolish. An apology won't make the little one's leg hurt less. David, what are you going to do now? Call the police? Marcus is a lawyer. He knows how to erase tracks better than anyone. I won't call the police right now. If I do, he'll liquidate all the assets and will never recover what belongs to Lily. Titos. David walked to the desk and opened his specialized laptop. He cracked his knuckles, a habit he had whenever he was about to enter a difficult programming battle. You and Lily get some sleep. I need to get into Marcus's office server system. David sat down, the blue light from the screen reflecting on his stern face. He was no longer the neglectful husband or the absent father. He was a hunter tracking his prey. Elena, I promise you, before the sun rises, Marcus will wish he never touched a dime of this family's money. Elena looked at David's back. She saw the eyes of the man she once loved, the one who always had a solution for every problem. She said nothing, only quietly walked to Lily's bedside and held her small hand. David began typing. Lines of code ran swiftly across the black screen. David pressed enter. The computer screen immediately displayed lines of green code running across the black background. He wasn't accessing a bank website. For a top technology engineer, web interfaces were just outer shells. He was using a backdoor he had secretly installed into Marcus's office data management system years ago. In the faint blue light of the hotel room at midnight, Elena stirred in bed. She woke up seeing David's motionless back in front of the screen. She stepped next to him, slipping on a bathrobe. What have you found? I'm following the trail of the numbers. Money doesn't just disappear, Elena. David pointed to a tree-like diagram appearing on the screen. Every month on the 5th, $50,000 left David's personal account. The first stop was the Vance Family Trust. This was where Marcus was legally listed as the manager. Everything was still perfectly legal up to this point. But right here, the money trail began to be diverted. David typed a few more queries. A limited liability company appeared with the name Elena Services, LLC. Elena Services, I never set up a company. Exactly. But Marcus did. David opened the company's business registration file. He turned the screen for Elena to see. The company's registered address was in a vacant lot on the city outskirts, where there was nothing but weeds and trash. The legal representative listed was a completely unfamiliar name, John Doe. However, David highlighted the contact phone number at the bottom of the page. He pressed the cross-reference search button. The result appeared instantly. It was the secondary phone line of Marcus's law office. He set up a funnel named after you to catch my money. Look here, from this funnel he only trickled out exactly $500 to your real account. Where did the rest go? David continued clicking. The remaining $49,500 began to disperse. He scrolled through the list of payments. There were huge payments to overseas online gambling sites. There were transfer orders to pay property taxes for 2 vacation mansions in Florida, registered in Marcus's wife's name. David paused at the most recent transaction. $180,000 were transferred straight to a luxury car dealership in Detroit a month ago. Transaction content: final payment for a Porsche 911 Turbo S. He bought a supercar with Lily's surgery money. He gambled with your grocery money. David felt his chest tighten. But that wasn't all. He accessed Marcus's personal cloud storage folder. He found an encrypted folder named E-Surveillance. David cracked it in less than 2 minutes. Inside were hundreds of photos. Elena covered her mouth to suppress a sob. The photos showed her kneeling, scrubbing the floor at apartment complex number 4. There were pictures of Lily sitting alone on the sidewalk, wearing a torn shoulder t-shirt, her eyes vacant as she watched other children play. Every photo was attached with a short report from a private investigator. Subject is still living in destitution. No signs of outside contact. Child shows signs of exhaustion, but still attends school. He knew everything. He hired someone to monitor you both every day to ensure you remained miserable. He wanted you to be desperate enough never to speak up. Why would he be so cruel? What did we ever do to him? Because greed is a monster that is never satisfied, Elena. He saw that I was too busy and you were too trusting. He thought he could devour this entire family without anyone knowing. David began to download all this data. He needed every piece of evidence Marcus couldn't deny. Bank records, transfer screenshots, and shell company files were successively compressed into a secure folder. David worked at an astonishing speed, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep and indignation. Suddenly, David's computer screen flickered constantly. A large window popped up right in the center with a bright red border and white capital letters. Warning: unauthorized access detected. System is automatically locking and sending notification to administrator. David swore under his breath. He forgot Marcus was a cunning lawyer. He had installed an alarm system for these sensitive documents. David quickly pulled out his external hard drive, but it was too late. The download process stopped at 98%. David, what happened? He knows I'm breaking into the system now. I've alerted the Fox. In the quiet of the hotel room at 3 a.m, David's cell phone on the table suddenly vibrated violently. The ringing was jarring. The screen lit up with the name Marcus. Elena took a step back, her face pale under the nightlight. David stared intensely at the phone. He didn't rush to answer. He let it ring until the very last seconds. David picked up the phone, taking a deep breath to keep his voice steady. He turned on the speakerphone. Elena stood motionless by the bed, her eyes glued to the phone, emitting a static sound from the speakerphone. David took a deep breath, feeling the coldness of the floor creeping up his feet. "What are you doing, Marcus?" Marcus's voice on the other end was unshaken. He no longer used the gentle, deferential tone of a hired lawyer. Instead, it was a voice so calm it was chilling. "I'm protecting us, David. You shouldn't stay up late looking at those numbers. It's not good for a CEO's sleep. Don't use the word steal. It sounds cheap. Let's call it a risk management fee. Do you know how much effort I expended cleaning up the mess you left behind? Over the past 5 years, I kept your empire standing while you were preoccupied with code in California." David felt the anger rise in his throat. He reached for the secondary phone on the table, quickly opening the recording application. On the computer screen, he tried to reopen the system call log. But as soon as he pressed the button, a red line appeared. Encryption error. Signal interference. "Don't waste your time recording, David. I'm using a military-grade secure line. This call doesn't exist on any server. You're brilliant with software, but I'm the one who holds the practical connections." Marcus chuckled scornfully. The laugh was dry, echoing in the quiet room. He began to play the trump card he had prepared for a long time. "Remember Project X, the core software that helped your company earn billions of dollars in royalties 5 years ago? That case was resolved. You told me the opponent withdrew their lawsuit and went bankrupt. Their bankruptcy is real, but the withdrawal is fake. I used your money to bribe the opposing lawyer and swap the original documents. I still hold the evidence proving you copied their algorithm. For the past 5 years, I've kept it in my safe as a life insurance policy for both of us." David froze. He felt an invisible hand squeezing his heart. Project X was his greatest pride, the foundation of his entire company. If this information came out, not only would his stock plummet, but he would also face prolonged lawsuits and the possibility of going to jail for federal copyright infringement. "Are you threatening me, Marcus?" "We're friends." "There are no friends in business, David. Only partners and interests. If you dare to file a lawsuit against me for embezzlement, I will send the Project X file to the Securities Commission and the press immediately. By tomorrow morning, the name David Ross will become the biggest technology scammer in history. You will lose everything. Elena and little Lily will return to the slums, but this time with a father in prison." Elena stood beside him, clearly hearing every word. She looked at David with a shocked expression. She realized their enemy was not just a money thief, but a monster who could devour their future again. David looked down at Lily. "What do you want?" "It's very simple. Turn off the computer. Tomorrow morning I will send an agreement to the hotel. The content is that you agree to a performance bonus of $5 million for me, exactly the amount missing that you saw in the books. Sign it, then go back to California. Continue being a millionaire and let me continue living my life. It's a win-win for both of us." "I need time. You have 6 hours until the stock market opens. Don't try to contact anyone on the board. I've already locked your access to the internal system. Good night, David." A long, beeping sound rang out. David put the phone down on the table. He felt suffocated. The luxurious room now resembled a giant glass cage. He stepped out onto the hotel balcony, pulling the glass door open sharply. The cold Detroit wind rushed in, but it didn't cool the heat in his head. From the 22nd floor, looking down the streets of Detroit at midnight were eerily quiet. David squinted at the street corner opposite the hotel entrance. A sleek black sedan tinted windows was parked motionless under the faint yellow streetlights. The rear window of the car lowered slightly. A glowing cigarette butt was flicked out, falling onto the asphalt and extinguishing. The car flashed its headlights twice, a signal directed straight up to the balcony where David was standing. He realized they were Marcus's associates. They weren't just threatening him over the phone. They were surrounding him. David retreated into the room, hastily locking the balcony door. He turned to Elena. Her face was pale under the nightlight. "We can't go out. They are down there." "Will he really do it, David? Will he destroy your company?" David didn't answer right away. He looked at the computer displaying the "Access Denied" notification. He looked at Lily, the child still deeply asleep, unaware that her father had just been backed into a corner. David clenched his fist. Marcus had calculated everything from finance and legality to physically isolating him. "I don't know, but I won't let him win that easily. Go to sleep." David slumped onto the sofa, his head in his hands. He felt completely isolated. The phone couldn't record, the computer was locked, and the watchers were waiting at the lobby door. In the darkness of the billion-dollar hotel room, David Ross realized that the money and technology he had always been proud of were now utterly useless against the brutality of reality. Fame or family. When the millionaire is cornered, a desperate move will change everything. Before starting the next part, we want to sincerely thank you for staying with us until this moment. We wish you good health. David retreated from the balcony, slamming the glass door shut and tightly locking the security latch. The click of the metal echoed dryly in the quiet room. Outside, Detroit remained shrouded in darkness, but the black sedan on the corner was wide awake. The red glow of the cigarette butt consistently flashed behind the tinted glass, like the eye of a nocturnal predator patiently waiting for its prey to tire. David stood frozen in the middle of the room, his hands hanging limp. In his mind was a cruel chessboard that Marcus had set up. On one side was the Ross tech empire, the result of 15 years of sleepless nights, intense fundraising, and thousands of lines of source code he wrote himself. If Marcus released the Project X file, everything would vanish into smoke within a single trading session. He would no longer be a Silicon Valley millionaire, but a criminal scorned by the entire technology industry. But on the other side were Elena and Lily. Marcus had proven he could reach them at any time. His family's safety was being used as a bargaining chip. David felt like a giant, made of clay, large but hollow, and easily toppled by the cunning lawyer's push. The rustling of a plastic bag came from behind him. David turned around. Elena had woken up at some point. She stood by the bed, her dark-rimmed eyes looking at him with a bitter understanding. Elena didn't ask about the midnight call, nor did she need to hear the agreement's terms. She looked at the way David was clenching his fist against the door and his prolonged silence to find her own answer. Elena bent down, beginning to collect the few belongings of herself and her daughter. She tucked the tube of ointment the doctor had just left into a plastic bag, then Lily's old clothes. Her every action was slow, carrying a painful resignation. "You should go, David. Go back to your world." "Elena, it's not as simple as you think. I understand. There's always a number larger than me and my daughter on your balance sheet. Marcus must have offered a number you couldn't refuse. Don't worry about us. I'm used to managing on my own now." "I didn't say I was leaving. But you didn't say you were staying either. Your silence has always meant you're preparing to leave. You don't belong in Detroit, not in apartment complex number 4, and certainly not in the troubles Marcus has caused. Let us go back to our place before Marcus changes his mind and does something worse." David tried to step forward to explain, but he stopped himself. What right did he have to keep her when his own neglect had pushed them into this situation? Elena walked to the bedside, gently shaking Lily's shoulder. "Lily, wake up, sweetie. We have to go." Lily rubbed her sleepy eyes. She looked around the luxurious room with a regretful expression, then obediently sat up. Instinctively, Lily put her small hand behind her hip to scratch the area where the wound was healing. But as her fingertips touched the edge of the stiff plastic tag still stained with supermarket ink that the doctor had temporarily bandaged, Lily quickly withdrew her hand. She winced, a painful gasp escaping between her teeth. Lily didn't cry, but her small shoulders trembled from the sudden pain. That withdrawal of Lily's hand was like a bucket of cold water thrown onto David's troubled mind. He looked at the bruise still clearly visible beneath the thin bandage. What was the point of building Ross Tech for 15 years if he couldn't protect his own daughter? The numbers in his bank account suddenly became meaningless. Marcus could take his company, he could take his reputation, but David could not let him take Lily's smile and safety one more time. Elena picked up the plastic bag, leading Lily toward the room door. Just as she reached out to turn the doorknob, David rushed over. He placed his large hand on the door, blocking their way out. "I said we're not going anywhere." "Get out of the way, David. You're just making things harder." "Listen to me, Elena. Marcus thought he had locked all my exits with Project X and money. He holds all my digital systems, but he doesn't hold this family's heart. I need you to help me find something. Something real, something he can't erase with code." Elena looked straight into David's eyes. For the first time in years, she saw in his eyes not cold calculations, but a sincere plea. She dropped the plastic bag onto the floor. "What do you want to find?" "There's still a bag of stuff you brought from that apartment complex. Dump it all out here for me." Elena awkwardly complied. She emptied everything left in the old travel bag onto the luxurious glass table. A few frayed children's clothes, an old pair of shoes, a toothbrush, and finally a small plush object fell out. It was the teddy bear, Mr. Bear, missing one ear, its brown fur faded with time. David grabbed the teddy bear with both hands. He looked at it as if seeing a priceless treasure. Lily stood nearby, her eyes wide, watching her father. She didn't understand why a rich man like her father would care about that old toy. "This bear, it was always with Lily, right?" "Yes, mister. Marcus brought it to her on her 3rd birthday. He said you sent it from California but told me not to put it in the washing machine because it would damage the electronics inside." David's breathing quickened. He turned the bear over, searching for a small stitch line along its back beneath the fluffy fur. The fingers of a top engineer began to work. He didn't rip the bear open, but used meticulous care to find a small gap hidden deep beneath the felt. David held his breath as his finger touched a tiny, hard object deep inside the stuffing. He gently pulled out a small black micro SD card. David inserted the memory card into the reader slot on his laptop. The laptop's cooling fan whirred in the quiet hotel room. On the screen, a series of files with long date and time numerical names appeared. David looked at the Mr. Bear teddy bear lying on the table, one ear worn and pathetic. Do you remember this bear? It's not a regular toy bought at the supermarket. Elena sat down next to David, her eyes still fixed on the old item. I only remember Marcus bringing it on Lily's 3rd birthday. He said you sent it from California, but warned me not to machine wash it because the electronics inside would break. He was half right. This is the first prototype from Ross Tech. At the time I was researching a smart child monitoring system, I installed a special acoustic sensor in this bear. As soon as it hears a child crying, it automatically records and uploads the data to a private cloud drive. This is the experimental version, so it runs on a secure server I long forgot the password to. Marcus probably forgot about this feature's existence too, or thought it was broken. David rummaged through his computer bag, pulling out an old micro USB charging cable. He plugged the cable end into the hidden charging port beneath the bear's tail fur. A small red light appeared on Mr. Bear's chest, flickering continuously. The bear seemed to come back to life after a long slumber. David began filtering the file list. He selected the time frame from 6 months ago, precisely the week Elena said they were evicted from the mansion. He clicked on the largest file. A static sound echoed, then a familiar voice resonated from the computer speaker. It was Lily's heart-wrenching crying, then the sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden floor. A man's voice spoke cold and authoritative. It was Marcus. "Sign here, Elena. Don't waste my time any further." In the recording, Elena's voice was choked with tears. "I won't sign. This is Lily's home. David would never let her be out on the street. Please let me call him." Marcus scoffed. His laugh through the computer speaker was hollow and cruel. "David, he's too busy enjoying his new life in California. Why do you think he hasn't answered your calls? Because he has a new wife, a younger, more suitable woman. You and your daughter are just old baggage he wants to get rid of quickly. Sign this asset waiver and I'll give you $500 to rent a temporary place. If you continue to be stubborn, I'll report you to social services for not being financially capable of raising a child. They will take your custody immediately." Elena sat next to David, her hands clutching the lapel of her bathrobe. Tears streamed down her face onto the luxurious glass table. She was listening to her own pain again, but this time with a different truth. "He said you had a new wife. He said you hated us." David didn't answer. He just silently took his ex-wife's trembling hand. He looked at the computer screen where the sound waves of the recording were still fluctuating. This was no longer a simple economic dispute. Marcus made the biggest mistake of his life. He thought he could use Project X to threaten my career, but this recording proves he committed extortion and fraud to steal a citizen's assets. This is a criminal offense, Elena. When a lawyer uses threats to force a destitute woman to sign papers, he has no way out. David quickly performed technical operations. He copied the audio file onto 3 different external hard drives. He no longer trusted Marcus's office cloud storage. He needed physical evidence that he couldn't erase with code. He opened his personal email, composing a letter to his old friend, the Detroit police chief inspector, someone David had assisted in cybercrime investigations. "Hello, Miller. I have a special gift for you. A renowned lawyer is unlawfully holding my assets and extorting my ex-wife. I've attached the audio evidence in the shell company bank statements. Please have a team ready at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. We're catching a big fish." David pressed send. He leaned back in his chair, the prolonged, heavy feeling in his heart suddenly replaced by a strange calmness. He looked at Lily, still sleeping soundly, the plastic tag removed, but the bruise remaining as a reminder of Marcus's cruelty. David took out his personal phone. He opened his messages and found Marcus's name. He typed a short, unwavering message. "I've thought it over. I will sign the agreement you want to protect Project X. Bring the contract to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel lobby in 30 minutes. I want to end this before sunrise." David placed the phone on the table. He turned to look at Elena, who was still stunned by the speed of the events. "Elena, please stay in the room and lock the door tightly. Don't let Lily go out until I call. I have to go meet him." "Are you going alone?" "He has people with him, David." "I'm not going alone. I'm going with the truth and the entire state's legal system. It's time for Marcus to return every cent he stole from Lily." David stood up, putting on his suit jacket. He checked the memory card in his pocket again. He was no longer the disadvantaged Silicon Valley millionaire backed into a corner. He walked toward the room door, gripping the doorknob, but not turning it immediately. He took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the truth in his hand. The elevator door opened. David stepped into the Ritz-Carlton hotel lobby at 5:45 in the morning. The large lobby space was quiet and empty, only the sound of his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. The light from the crystal chandeliers cast a luxurious yet cold glow. David walked straight to the round table nestled in the corner behind large potted palms. He placed his laptop on the table but didn't open it immediately. David looked up at the mezzanine. Through the frosted glass, he saw Elena's silhouette sitting there clutching Lily. According to plan, he had asked hotel security to take them to the safest area before Marcus arrived. From that vantage point, Elena could observe everything, but Marcus's associates wouldn't be able to reach them. Elena subtly nodded to David. Lily was still groggy, her head resting on her mother's shoulder. She didn't know that her father was about to end the nightmare that had tormented the family for the past 3 years. Exactly at 6 o'clock, the hotel's revolving door moved. Marcus walked in. He wore a gray charcoal 3-piece suit, crisp and expensive. Trailing him were 2 tall men in black suits wearing sunglasses, even though the sun hadn't fully risen. These were the men who had been in the sedan surrounding David last night. Marcus walked with the demeanor of a victor. The smile on his face was radiant, as if he were going to receive the most prestigious award of his life. Marcus pulled out a chair and sat down opposite David. The 2 bodyguards stood on either side, arms crossed, forming a formidable wall of muscle. Marcus placed the leather-bound folder on the glass table, gently pushing it toward David with his finger. "You look a little sleep-deprived, David, but I'm glad you saw a reason. Silicon Valley doesn't need a copyright scandal, and I don't want to destroy the career of an old friend. Do you call this seeing reason, Marcus? I call this coercion. Use whatever word you like. The result is what matters. Sign here and $5 million will become a legitimate performance bonus for me. In return, the Project X file will disappear forever in an incinerator. We will be successful gentlemen again. You see, I even brought my own pen for you." Marcus took out a gold-plated fountain pen and placed it on the folder. He leaned back in his chair, interlacing his fingers, and waited. His eyes were full of arrogance. He thought David was just a programmer who was good at calculations, but weak against legal psychological tactics. He believed David would choose fame and money over an endless battle. David looked at the fountain pen, then into Marcus's eyes. He didn't pick up the pen. Instead, David slowly opened the laptop lid. "I learned one thing in Silicon Valley, Marcus. Data never lies. People do, but data doesn't. What are you going to do? Put on a presentation about business ethics. Don't waste my time. I just want you to hear something, an anomaly I found in my family's system." David pressed play. The computer volume was turned up to maximum. The quiet hotel lobby suddenly echoed with static, then a voice rang out clearly. "David has a new wife now. He considers you and your daughter a burden. Sign here and I'll give you $500, otherwise you're out on the street." The smile on Marcus's face vanished instantly. His complexion changed from healthy pink to sickly gray in a matter of seconds. He lunged forward, trying to grab the laptop, but David quickly slammed the screen shut, his hand pressing firmly on the metal casing. What is this? That is your voice, Marcus. 6 months ago at the mansion you unlawfully took. Did you forget that Lily's teddy bear has an automatic recording function when a child cries? It recorded all your extortion, all your threats against Elena. This is not economic evidence, Marcus. This is criminal evidence of extortion and emotional abuse." Marcus trembled. He realized he had made a fatal mistake by overlooking that old toy. He turned to the 2 bodyguards, his voice becoming hurried and aggressive. "Get that computer for me now. Destroy it." The 2 bodyguards stepped forward, intending to lunge at David, but at that moment, something unexpected happened. A middle-aged man sitting at a nearby table reading a newspaper suddenly stood up. A woman enjoying coffee at the bar also rushed over. "Detroit police, everyone stay still. Hands off the table immediately." In an instant, 6 guests scattered throughout the lobby simultaneously pulled out badges and sidearms. They were not hotel guests, but a team of economic crime investigators who had been strategically waiting as requested by David. Marcus's 2 bodyguards were pinned to the floor before they could react. The dry sound of handcuffs clicking rang out. Marcus tried to retreat, bumping into the table behind him. He attempted to flee toward the revolving door, but 2 officers tightly held his arms. He screamed, his face contorted with fear and anger. "David, you're insane. You'll lose everything. I'll release the Project X file. Your company will collapse today." David stood up. He walked closer to Marcus, stopping just a step away. David didn't shout. He spoke in a low, cold, and authoritative voice like a father who had just secured justice for his child. "Go ahead and release it, Marcus. Let the whole world know about Project X. But think about it. What value do the words of a person just arrested for extorting a woman and child have to shareholders? You're a lawyer. You know the concept of unreliable witness, don't you? Your file is now just worthless scraps of paper from a criminal." Marcus's mouth gaped open, but no words came out. All his confidence and deceit completely collapsed under David's brutal logic. He had used reputation to threaten David, and now his own reputation had been destroyed first. Marcus slumped his shoulders, defeated, as the officer compelled him to walk. The police escort led Marcus and his associates through the hotel's revolving door. The lights of the police cars outside cast continuous flashes of blue and red into the lobby. David stood there, watching the back of the man who was once his closest friend being loaded into the special vehicle. He felt no pleasure, only an overwhelming weariness lifting from his shoulders. There was no winner in this battle, only exposed wounds. David looked up at the mezzanine. Elena was standing close to the glass, clutching Lily. Lily was fully awake, looking down at the lobby with a bewildered expression. Elena looked at David, nodding slightly, a single tear rolling down her cheek, but her lips held a gentle smile of relief. David signaled for them to come down to the lobby. He walked to meet the mother and daughter at the bottom of the stairs. Lily rushed into David's arms. David lifted her up, feeling the warmth of her small body. He looked at Elena. "It's over. He won't bother us anymore." "Thank you, David. I thought we were going to lose everything." "We didn't lose anything. We just found what matters most." David led Elena and Lily out through the hotel doors. Dawn was breaking. The first rays of sunlight shone on the buildings of Detroit. Marcus's black sedan had been towed away, replaced by the open space of the street. David knew that ahead of him were countless legal procedures to recover the assets, and possibly difficulties at his company in California. But seeing Lily smiling and Elena looking less worried, David knew he had made the only right choice in his life. The morning sun in Detroit poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 15th floor apartment. There was no longer the musty smell of green mold walls, nor the loud arguments echoing in dark hallways. Instead, there was the scent of new pine wood and clean paint. David Ross sat on the glossy wooden floor, surrounded by scattered cardboard pieces and screws. He was wrestling with the oak dining table leg. His hands, which were only accustomed to typing and signing million-dollar contracts, were now stained with oil and scratches. David held the Allen wrench, trying to tighten a stubborn screw. He was sweating his breath ragged because he wasn't used to manual labor. This was the apartment he had just rented for the mother and daughter. It wasn't as ostentatious as the old mansion, but it was fully furnished and extremely secure. In the kitchen, Elena was slicing onions. The sound of the knife hitting the cutting board was steady. The aroma of sautéed garlic spread through the space, carrying the breath of a real family. Elena wore a light blue apron, her hair neatly combed. Her complexion had regained its color, although sometimes there were still moments of silence in her eyes when she stared into space. A subtle barrier still existed between the two, a slight awkwardness of people who had been lost to each other for too long. They didn't talk about love, nor did they promise a future. They chose to be present in the same room, listening to each other's sounds. David wiped the sweat from his forehead, leaving a long, dark streak. He looked up at Elena over the counter, separating the living room and the kitchen. "Hey, Elena, Marcus's lawyer called this morning." Elena stopped cutting. She didn't turn around, but her shoulders stiffened slightly. "What else does he want?" "Nothing. He just reported that Marcus's bail application was denied. The police found 3 more shell accounts in the Cayman Islands. All his assets, including the new Porsche, have been completely frozen. The court is expediting procedures to return the money he stole to our family trust." Elena resumed slicing the onion, the speed seeming a little faster. "I don't really care about the money. I'm just glad he can't send another surveillance report on Lily. The feeling of someone peeking at your child through a keyhole, it's disgusting. He will be in prison for a very long time, Elena. I've hired the best legal team to ensure he has no loophole to escape the extortion charges. The company in California has also stabilized after I released the evidence of Marcus falsifying the Project X file. The shareholders stood by me." David finished speaking and bent down to the table leg again. He knew Elena was still hurt by his neglect. Money now was just compensatory numbers. It couldn't instantly heal 3 years of hardship. He tightened the last screw, and the table stood firm on the floor. Lily ran out of the bedroom. She wore a new floral dress. Her feet no longer dragged but were much more agile. The bruise on her hip had completely faded, leaving only a pale mark like a sad memory. Lily was clutching something tightly in her hand. She stood in front of David, pouting. "Daddy, can you help me with this?" David put down the Allen wrench, smiling at his daughter. "Anything you want, princess." Lily held out the old pair of jeans. It was the supermarket pair Elena had shoplifted in desperation. The large security tag was still there, stiff and cold. Although David had bought Lily dozens of new designer clothes, she still kept these pants. Perhaps Lily understood that this was the last gift her mother had to exchange for her self-respect to bring home. She couldn't bear to throw them away, but she also didn't dare wear them because of the physical pain the plastic tag caused. David looked at the gray plastic tag. It resembled a shackle Marcus had chained to his family. He took a deep breath, stood up, and walked toward the red toolbox by the door. David pulled out a specialized pair of bolt cutters, the kind with hardened steel jaws he had specially ordered. "Give it to me." David sat down on the sofa, placing the jeans on his lap. Lily stood close beside him, her small hands gripping the lapel of his suit jacket. Elena also stopped working in the kitchen. She stepped out, leaning against the doorframe, her eyes intently watching the cutters in David's hand. The room suddenly became strangely quiet. David slid the cutter jaws into the small gap between the plastic tag and the fabric of the pants. He worked with extreme care, as if performing a microsurgery. He knew there was an ink pack inside. If he broke it, the pants would be ruined, and perhaps a part of Elena's memory would also be tainted by failure. David's fingers tightened on the handles of the cutters. The blue veins on the back of his hand bulged. He looked at Lily, then at Elena. He saw the anticipation in their eyes. David focused all his strength into his hands. Click. A dry, decisive sound echoed in the quiet space. The gray plastic tag split in two, detaching from the denim fabric. It fell onto the wooden table, rolled a few times, and lay motionless like a harmless piece of trash. The ink pack inside remained intact. The denim underneath was only slightly wrinkled with no tear. Lily let out a joyous squeal. She picked up the pants, pressing them against her face. "It doesn't hurt me anymore. Daddy's so good." David put down the cutters. He looked at the broken plastic tag on the table. That click was not just the sound of plastic breaking. For David, it was the sound of the last binding threads snapping. It was the sound of unlocking freedom for Elena, for Lily, and for himself. He felt a huge burden lifted from his chest. Elena walked over, picked up the broken plastic piece, looked at it for a moment, and threw it straight into the nearby trash can. She looked at David this time without caution or resentment. "Thank you for taking it off, David. Both this tag and everything else, too. I will never let anything hurt you two again. I promise." David stood up. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit jacket, nor was he checking his phone for stock prices. He cleared the pile of cardboard boxes into a corner. "All done, my girl. The dining table is ready. Tonight, Daddy is making spaghetti bolognese for the whole family. I learned the recipe online this morning." Lily jumped for joy, rushing to hug David's waist. She laughed heartily, a clear, pure sound David knew he would dedicate his life to protecting. David picked her up, spinning her around in the sunlit living room. Elena watched the scene, a happy tear silently rolling down her cheek. She quickly wiped it away with the edge of her apron and returned to the kitchen to prepare the plates. Dinner was simple on the wooden table David had just assembled. The spaghetti was slightly overcooked, the sauce a bit too dark, but it was the best meal David had ever eaten. They sat together without the interruption of phone calls, without Marcus's fraudulent financial reports. There was only the sound of forks clinking on ceramic plates and Lily's laughter as she talked about her new school friends. David watched Elena affectionately serving food to their daughter. He realized that millionaire or CEO were just empty titles. True wealth lay in being able to personally cut off a painful plastic tag for his child and being able to cook a simple dinner with his ex-wife. The scene of the 15th floor apartment gradually faded under the golden sunset of Detroit. From the outside, it was just a lit window like any other. But inside that window, a family had just stepped out of the darkness. David Ross no longer looked toward the balcony to see if anyone was watching him. He looked into the eyes of Elena and Lily. He knew he would stay here not for 6 months, but forever. Presence is truly the most sincere apology. We are so busy building the castle that we forget to care for the people living inside it. In real life, many parents are playing a different version of David Ross. They work 12 hours a day, send their children to the most expensive schools, and believe that financial support is the measure of love. We often tend to delegate the happiness and safety of our families to strangers, from lawyers and nannies to managers, forgetting that delegation always comes with risks. The plastic security tag that caused the bruise on little Lily's skin is a symbol of the hidden troubles that money cannot see. In real life, that could be a child's loneliness, a partner's exhaustion, or the rift in relationships we mistakenly thought were insured by money. The most authentic lesson is, money is only a tool. Presence is the responsibility. Don't wait until the family bears irreparable scars to suddenly return. True wealth only comes when you care enough to personally remove the painful plastic tags in the lives of your loved ones. Note: the story above is completely fictitious. Character names, locations, and events have been constructed for illustrative and artistic purposes. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental.